now with great pleasure that I call upon the Right Honourable Jeremy Thorpe MP, Trinity ex-President, Leader of the Liberal Party, to speak fifth and in favour of the motion.
Mr. President, sir, may I first thank you for your invitation and say that for one who was nurtured in this society, I can think of nowhere better to debate this great issue. And may I say, first of all, that the right honourable gentleman who has just spoken has totally and utterly convinced me on one issue, and that is the total dissatisfaction, if not disgust, which he holds for the terms which his colleagues in the Cabinet brought back from Brussels. And in his disgust at the efforts of the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the poor old Minister of Agriculture, who apparently is a mere cipher of Monsieur Ladinois, I want to ask him and the Right Honourable Lady, how was it that they were let down? Did they know what the agenda was when they went out to renegotiate? Or were they kept in the dark for a year, not knowing what was going on? Because if so, any self-respecting minister would have resigned. But if they knew, but since they are obviously both right honourable members of integrity, they must have known what was on the agenda. At what moment did the frightful moment of truth hit them that everything that they'd wanted hadn't been brought back? Was it within hours of the Dublin summit? There are, of course, cynics who say that they would have turned down the terms whatever they were, but I cannot believe that that can be the case. And therefore, a question to which I believe this country is entitled to an answer is, if the answer on June the 5th is yes, they will, of course, accept the wishes of the British people. But what else will they do? Will they continue as ministers, implementing policies which they believe to be disastrous from the United Kingdom? Will they do that? Or will they go on half-heartedly on full pay? So to speak, the 5 maggots in the European apple? Or will they overnight have a total conversion to the European cause? I think we are entitled to know. And if the right honourable gentleman is not prepared to say, I hope that the right honourable lady will do so. And may I say that if she does not, some of us who practiced at the criminal bar remember those prisoners who are asked to plead and refuse, and the judge has to decide whether they are mute of malice or by visitation of God. You see, we are here, the right honourable gentleman and myself, we are here to support the Prime Minister. At least on this issue. In fairness, it is true to say that we have all at different times on this issue supported the Prime Minister. They on phase 1 and phase 3 when he was against, the right honourable gentleman and myself on phase 2 and phase 4 when he was in favour. He's outmanoeuvred St. Paul. He was converted but once on the road to Damascus. The Prime Minister has been converted twice on the road to Europe. Well, first of all, of course, we are told that the right honourable gentleman alone is a great constitutionalist because he and his colleagues put it to the British people. In 1967, the Labour government applied to join. There was never going to be a general election or a referendum. In the words of the Prime Minister, it was going to be left to Parliament to decide. There was nothing in the 1970 Labour manifesto which said that there must be a referendum or an election. Again, it was to be left to Parliament, and that was the view of the Prime Minister right up till 1972. The only reason that the Labour Party today is not prepared to leave it to the sovereignty of Parliament, about which they talk so much, is because, as Shirley Williams said, if there hadn't been a referendum, the Labour Party would have broken apart. And it'll do so even though there is a referendum. But we happen to believe that it is, to quote the Prime Minister, it is right for Britain, it is right for Europe, it is right for the Commonwealth, it is right for the world to stay in, because it's the fastest growing market in the world. It is an outward-looking market. But what is their alternative? Apart from an intonation which sounded something like Michael Foot's, and the word Britain pronounced in a rather Churchillian sense, there was no alternative put forward from the right honourable gentleman whatsoever. Which countries in the world want us closer to them in a new trading relationship? Which ones? Presumably they want trade. They want as much trade as they can get. They also, the next breath, say, well, we must also be allowed to have protection and put up tariffs. Free trade means actually that you trade freely. Is it the Commonwealth? The only Commonwealth leader who wants us out is General Amin. The right honourable gentleman talking about Canada and Australia and New Zealand. They are in negotiation with the common market. Pierre Trudeau came over because he wanted a contractual relationship with them. There is no member of the Commonwealth who says, please come out, because we would so much rather trade with you out of Europe than continue our own association with the community. And what about the new Commonwealth? The 22 Commonwealth countries who benefited from Mrs. Hart in one of her temporary pro-European movements. Do they want to come out of a common market in which there is totally free entry for their industrial products, virtually free entry for their agricultural products, and a development fund of 1,600 million on which they can draw? So that is not an alternative, and I note that the right honourable gentleman didn't put it forward. Delighted.
We do not accept that after you abandoned them, the Commonwealth had nowhere else to go but to the common market. And that...
First and foremost, I do not accept that the Commonwealth was abandoned. Secondly, I would remind the honourable gentleman from Sri Lanka that there were members of the Commonwealth who actually had associate membership, like Nigeria, of the common market before we even joined. And we are dealing with realities. And the reality is that the whole of the Commonwealth wants Britain to stay in. And the Commonwealth itself is deriving clear benefits. So there's no alternative there. And unless the right honourable gentleman or the right honourable lady can put forward an alternative, they're asking you to leap into the unknown. What about the EFTA countries? Certainly not Norway, or Denmark, or Sweden, or Austria, or Portugal, or Switzerland, or Finland, or Iceland. Why? Because they already have an industrial free trade relationship with the community. Now, I'll come to the point in a minute. Couldn't we do the same? If we pull out, those countries will immediately have to erect a tariff against us. Unless, of course, we ask them to tear up their treaties, to renegotiate their position with the common market, and ask the common market then to renegotiate a position with us. But what evidence is it that any one of those countries wants us to come out? Which one has told the right honourable gentleman or the right honourable lady, please come out? We as an EFTA country depend upon your leaving the common market. None whatsoever. Ah, says Mr. Benn, but of course they'll have to give us a new arrangement. We're so important to them. Are we? We export 33.4% of our exports to the 8. We export 50% of our exports to Western Europe. not just the 8, but the 8 plus EFTA. The common market export 8% of their exports to us. Are we really so important to them that they will fall over backwards? I think not. And if the right honourable gentleman is doing his job as Secretary of State for Trade, the first thing he'd do is to see that this country remained in a trading bloc, which now involves 84 countries of the world, not 8, but 84. You say, but what about the Norwegian experience? Well, is he satisfied? Is the right honourable lady, with her great passion for sovereignty, satisfied with a situation in which Norway only gets an industrial free trading relationship, providing she accepts the regulations relating to state aid, to nationalised industries, to monopolies, which apply to the whole of the community, in which they have already had to cut back half of their proposed trawler-free zones in order to get free trade for their fishing products, in which they are only given a one-year agreement, which can be abrogated, and in which the common market reserved to themselves the right to erect an external tariff for anything which they deem to be sensitive, that is to say, of competitive value. That would affect straight away, I suggest, chemicals, the textile industry, and the motor car industry. Do they want to pay the price for food, which Norway is having to pay? 50% more on beef, 80% more on bread, wheat 40% more, sugar having to be bought on the world market. Is that the alternative they want? I do not believe that either the Commonwealth or the EFTA countries are an alternative. Have they been in touch with Eastern Europe? That's another trading bloc. Let's look at everything. Is that their proposal? And where, may I ask, is the right honourable lady with her now proverbial shopping basket? Where will she be going like Little Red Riding Hood round the world? To find cheap food. Which natives has she in mind to exploit? The fact remains, Mr. President, that the shortage of food in the world is something to which the right honourable gentleman hasn't yet woken up, because the primary producers are no longer going on to be being exploited. And I believe it is right that we should pay a fair price, but by being in this community it is more likely that as a major collective buyer we will have security of supplies at a fair price. And indeed we have saved something of the order of £139 million already as a result of being in the community and paying the community prices rather than outside. The right honourable gentleman, of course, got on to capital movements. I knew there were about 15 things he could raise, and he raised about 5 of them. And he said, those who know the answer and those who study it. Well, I'll tell him about that one. His own Under-Secretary of State for Trade, in a written answer in Hansard on the 20th of May, said that of the £519 million direct investment by the United Kingdom in the common market, £144 million was financed from unremitted profits, subsidiaries and associates, £94 million by other non-cash transactions, net overseas borrowings, about £300, giving a net inflow of capital of £22 million into this country. Not an outflow, an inflow. That's from Eric Deakins, who is an anti-marketeer, who is his own Minister of State. Collective ministerial responsibility even cuts ministries in half. And so we have had any reference to the Liberal Party. I will tell you, my friend, there is one party in this country that has always been totally consistent on Europe, and it has been the Liberal Party. And I will tell our friend that if it hadn't been for the votes of the Conservative and Liberal parties, the policies of the two right honourable lady and gentlemen which they now oppose would not have had a majority in the House of Commons. And I will also tell him if it hadn't been for the vote of the Liberal Party, the legislation of the right honourable gentleman would not have been passed in 1972. And therefore, Let us not hear anything about the Liberal Party and its failure to support. The first vote I cast in Europe was in 1960, and we had one Labour member to his credit in the lobby, the entire Tory party against us, and the Labour Party abstaining like sullen eunuchs. Now, what else? The bureaucrats. Oh yes, I knew we'd have that, the bureaucrats. And the terrible regulations that have been passed. Which particular regulation had they in mind, which almost brought them to the point of resignation in the last year? Not quite, because no one has a greater devotion to staying in the job and carrying out the duty to the nation than the anti-marketeers in a pro-market cabinet. You must say they're stickers. But you know, what I found most shocking is not merely that there was no alternative. Neither EFTA, nor a free trade area, nor the Commonwealth, there was no alternative put forward. And we are being asked, after all, to come out of something which many of us believe has been to the benefit of this country. We were not merely given wrong figures on capital movements. That's if the right honourable gentleman agrees with his minister. I think his powers of sacking at the moment are not very great. We were not only given some bogus figures on food, but it doesn't seem to have crossed the mind of the right honourable gentleman that the two world wars of this century were caused by civil war in Western Europe. And for the first time, war between, for example, France and Germany is not only politically unthinkable, it is economically impossible because of the European coal and steel community and the way in which the two economies of those countries have been interwoven. Does it mean nothing to them that the democracies of Western Europe have come together for peaceful purposes? That out of the ruins of the Second World War, their cities have been rebuilt, their economies have been revived, they have extended a hand of friendship to the developing world through Lome and the other agreements, which now encompass 84 nations of the world? Does that mean nothing to them? That it is the lowest external tariff of any major marketing bloc in the world? Does that mean nothing? That it is beginning to have an influence which is recognized throughout the world, of which we are part? Does that mean nothing? Let me remind them of this. 1947, these words were said: "Working together, we are still strong enough to hold the balance of world power. But if we permit ourselves to be separated from France and so from the rest of Europe, we shall not only destroy our own and Europe's chances of recovery, but also make a third world war inevitable. A united Europe, strong enough to deter an aggressor, but voluntarily renouncing the most deadly of offensive weapons of modern warfare, would be the best guarantor of world peace. The greatest obstacle to European unity is, of course, British initiative. To be effective, this initiative must be primarily concerned with European unity." The authors of that, 1947, were the Keep Left movement of the Tribune Group. And the authors were the late Dick Crossman, Michael Foot, and Ian Mercado. Would that they believed now what they believed then, and we would live in a much more secure world. Well, if they do, I take the honourable gentleman's word for it, but I haven't actually heard those remarks during the referendum campaign. No, sir. The case of the anti-marketeers is one of narrow nationalism. How else could they have united the IRA and the provisionals? Yes, certainly. The honourable gentleman didn't know that, he better. The two extreme wings, the two terrorist wings in Ireland, have for the first time become united on a political issue, that they are against Europe, against the common market. There's not a smear, it is a fact. So have both the nationalist parties. There are some good moderates, like the Right Honourable Lady and the Right Honourable Gentleman, of course. But it does say it takes quite a mixed bag to get the Communist Party and the National Front, the IRA and the Provos. We keep him out of this country, and he does not have a vote, and neither does he campaign. I would merely say that I believe that we are seeing a most extraordinary coalition of 19th century imperialists and 20th century Marxists, and I do not think it very impressive. And neither do I believe that whether you look at the contribution, oh, that was another point of the Right Honourable Gentleman's. You better hear what his own government again say. You'll take Mr. Joel Barnett's view, May the 5th, our contribution over 2 years has been 0.2% of our total public expenditure. 0.2, that's the crippling burden. May the 5th, he told us that in fact our receipts were 35 million more than our contributions. And he told us on the 16th of May that in the first 4 months of this year we had received in grants and loans £49 million more than we had put in. Now, it may well be that it will be thought wicked that we accept £15.5 million in order to modernise the tin plate works in Ebbw Vale and prevent many of Michael Foot's constituents thereby being caused redundant. That it may be wicked for the NCB to have borrowed £122 million from the European Investment Bank to carry out modernisation at much lower rates of interest than obtainable in this country. That it may be crazy to have £20 million a year for retraining. I happen to believe that because we are in the community, these are benefits which we shall enjoy, because the community exists to cooperate amongst the 250 million, and those who are most in need get the most help. And it so happens, whether we like it or not, the moment we are the sick man of Europe. And this is the moment we are asked to pull out. Mr. President, may I say this? Edmund Burke, appropriately writing to the sheriffs of Bristol, said in 1777, magnanimity in politics is not seldom the truest wisdom, and a great empire and little minds go ill together. There has been very little magnanimity on the part of the anti-marketeers as to what Europe has achieved, not only for itself but for the world. And I happen to believe that short-sightedness in politics produces the worst counsel for a nation. And today I believe that on the great issue of Europe, which demands the widest possible vision, it is the little minds who are advising us to come out. It is for that reason that I want to see them vanquished on Thursday the 5th. Because I believe that Britain can have a new and confident role in Western Europe. I believe that the community itself can lead to be a great influence for peace in the world. It is so recognised by almost every nation in the world. I do not see why we should reject this great opportunity. I am delighted and proud that we are part of that community, and I hope that my fellow countrymen on Thursday will vote to see that we continue in that role and we play our full part in the unification of Western civilization.